Okay. Hello, everybody. I am here today with Naftal and another Emma, and we are all discussing how we found each other in this sort of drug harmed world. Our stories, what we're doing to try and change it, and all the bits in between. So I thought maybe we should start with how we actually found each other. Who
Okay, well,
wants to
I'll
start?
start. I think I'm not really sure, but I found Emma SU on Instagram. I think I was like searching for hashtags and benzos, and then I came across your Instagram page, and then I came across your YouTube, your first podcast. I was like, wow, I've got to know this woman. So I texted you, I DM'd you, and that's how I met you. And Emma Hames, I found you by Googling Christy Huff. And then
Oh,
I
I
came
didn't know
across
that.
your podcast series.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's so
Ah.
funny.
And then I actually noticed that Emma, you were already following me on Instagram, but then Naftal told me about you and that you were like a musician and all of this. And I think that's how we then connected.
Yeah, I think maybe you came up in like my recommended list, and
Mm.
I saw something about benzos, but also the fact that you were creative and a musician, and yeah, so Instagram is to thank for all this, I guess.
I know. I mean, I often talk about how Instagram is really toxic, but actually in this instance, it's actually been a really good thing.
Definitely,
Yeah, definitely.
definitely.
So I guess we could all do a little kind of rundown of our individual stories. Obviously, all of them could last like 10 days long, so we'll try and keep it short. Naftal, do you want to start with what happened with you? And yeah.
Sure, sure. So I got prescribed benzodiazepines back in 2016. I had Lyme disease that got treated, but after that was resolved, I developed like serious debilitating tinnitus and insomnia. So that's when I got my benzos. They weren't really effective anyways. And then a few months after the first benzo, I got prescribed a second benzo, which seemed like a miracle drug at the time. I didn't know anything about benzodiazepines. The only thing that I was told that they could be addictive. And then after a few years, I was just constantly tired, sought help for my tinnitus. I received cognitive behavioral therapy for sleep and tinnitus. I was like, okay, I'm ready to ditch the drug. I think I should be able to sleep in a natural way. I sought help to come off of the benzos. I was misinformed in how to safely do that, and I almost died. And that
Mm.
was back in 2022. 2021 was my first attempt, which failed, and I reinstated. Then I did a second attempt. Then that was the one that I almost died, and found my benzo wisdom February 2022. When I
How
realized I
long?
was sorry, yeah.
Sorry, how long were you on the benzo?
I am still on a benzo. It's been six and a
Mm.
half years, but I think I was like actively unaware about benzodiazepines for about 5.5 years. I'm
Hmm.
currently still tapering. I'm on 5 milligrams of diazepam/Valium. And that's kind of my story in a nutshell.
And
Thank you,
Natasha,
Naftal.
if it's okay to ask, because obviously it's quite an extreme um, version. Some people have quite mild tapering or withdrawal reactions to benzos, and some people almost lose their life. Not everyone's necessarily going to know why these drugs can be a threat to life. Would you be able to just share what actually happened to you in that respect, and why it was so dangerous?
Sure. So after my first failed attempt, I went to an addiction facility. And by the time that I got there, I had reduced 66% of my dose on my own. Um, I was having some small kind of like seizure like thingies, but I was like, maybe this comes with the territory. So I asked my then addiction specialist, like, I'm on this amount now. I'm struggling to get to zero. Could you help me with that? And he advised me to instantly switch to diazepam/Valium. And I responded so poorly to that benzo that after trying it for 2 days, I went cold turkey. And after a few days, I just got very, very sick and sicker and sicker and sick. And at its worst, I think I had a heart attack. I hadn't slept for 2 days straight. And I had grand mal seizures. I had like a bloody nose that lasted 4 hours. And I just became very suicidal. The suffering was so intense that I wanted to jump out the window. At some point, I do realize that I'm actually physically dying. So I do take a diazepam, 7 milligrams or whatever. And so I kind of realized, like, I will die if I don't take the benzo. I didn't know why, but I was like, I don't want to take these drugs anymore. But apparently I was just having grand mal seizures, akathisia, no sleep. You just go mad. You get into a psychosis, really.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
the heart, my heart pounding was extreme. Like, I don't know the beats per minute, but it's something that I'd never experienced before. It was like beating on like a mouse, like so extreme. I was like, what the hell is this?
Yeah. And would you say that obviously initially you went in for the tinnitus, but then what happened was like a trillion times worse?
Definitely.
I think that's a
Yeah.
commonality, isn't it, with the majority of people that end up on a benzo, is if we could go back in time and just deal with that original issue. Now we've got that sort of bird's eye view of what's going on. There are a million different ways that I think we'd all approach that original issue differently, and knowing that we wouldn't have ended up with this trillion X worse scenario having been on the benzo, which is kind of shouldn't be like that, but it is.
Exactly. And actually, benzos cause tinnitus.
Yeah,
do.
that's what happened to me. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, everyone that I speak to in withdrawal has really, really severe tinnitus. So,
Yep.
yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that, Naftal. And we'll go more, we can talk more. Emma, please do share your story.
Yes, I ended up on a benzo after a virus, which really bizarrely I think was a kind of coronavirus about 12 years ago now. So I just picked up this virus I was doing a teaching placement, and I was really pushing myself to sort of do my postgrad degree and make sure I didn't fail and kept on top of the workload. So I wasn't really resting, and because of that, the virus hit quite hard compared to other colds, flus, viruses. And so I knew that something was quite significantly wrong with this virus at the beginning, but basically for the whole of my postgrad degree, doctors were telling me it was just in my head and it was just the stress of teaching. And similar to Naftal, like I knew intuitively something was really wrong, but wasn't being believed. So fast forward a year, I moved to France, and they discovered that my lung capacity was at 60% and I had a kind of asthma. And because of the lack of oxygen in my body, developed quite severe anxiety. So I was having panic attacks and not sleeping, that kind of stuff. And that's where I was prescribed the benzo. Didn't like being on it, felt very drugged up within a week, possibly. I think within a couple of months, I asked to come off it, and doctors refused. And I was early 20s at the time. I thought they're the professionals. They know what they're doing. I'm going to trust in them. And I was on it for the 4 years that I lived in France, and just increasingly felt like something's wrong. Something's not right. Again, intuition kind of screaming at me. And I started having heart palpitations out the blue. Didn't make any sense. Went to a cardiologist. They said your heart's fine. And in 2016, the catalyst for me coming back to the UK was the fact that I went to a French doctor who said, we're going to analyze your dreams. So she was the only French doctor that spoke English in the city that I lived in. And although my French was quite good at that time, like I just didn't want to take any risks with medical French. So I went to her, and she was the one that said, we're going to analyze your dreams to find the root cause of this. And I thought that's not good enough. So I came back to the UK, and it was there I found out I should have been on the drug for a week maximum, as opposed to the 4 years I've been on it. I cold turkeyed, not knowing the risks, and basically spent 5 years pretty much housebound. So that was 6 years ago. Spent 5 years pretty much housebound. It was only 2019 doctors kind of confirmed that it was the drug. For 2 years, they just said it was in my head again. And yeah, similar to Naftal, just hell, the heart beating and palpitations in the middle of the night, where you feel like your heart's whirring up like a washing machine. It's and you just feel like you're dying. So I had 35 ambulances because of that. And yeah, anywhere between 30, 40 symptoms, gaslighting, not being believed, being told it's not as bad as I think it is. It's just in my head. I need to be positive, and people just don't realize that it's torture, what these do to you. And you don't really have any support. So that's my story. I'm off them now and just continuing to try to heal.
Yes. And I suppose it's in this last year that you've started to feel like more like, yourself again.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to put it, because I think one of the things these drugs do to you is they rip that sense of identity from you, and you can't do things physically, but also they are an injury to your brain. You lose your sense of self, you lose the ability to think in the same way. And I do want to sort of highlight the fact that that isn't permanent, and I don't want anyone listening to sort of feel a loss of hope with that. I think all three of us are coming through what has been hell, and can kind of show that is, that is possible. But yeah, it's been a journey, and I think you go through a kind of ego death, where you just, everything you knew about the world and yourself kind of gets dismantled, which is terrifying. But then when you go into that rebuilding phase, you have an opportunity to kind of say, okay, here are the pieces of everything that's been burnt down by somebody else, but I now get to choose how to rebuild and what pieces I want to keep, and how I want to sort of show up in the world, and what is it that I do want to create out of this kind of annihilation that's happened.
Definitely. And also the fact that, we are very much deserted by medical professionals. There is no one that can offer help, and often they make it worse. So it's for me, it's been this huge eye opener to a world that I never knew existed. No one would ever expect a doctor to give somebody this, and to then gaslight you and deny it. And the whole thing is just completely unbelievable.
It is. And I think we've discussed this before, that it sort of feels like the plot out of a thriller movie or something. It just doesn't feel real. And until you're exposed to it directly or through somebody that you're close to, even if you sort of hear about it, it's probably hard to really understand the reality of what's going on, because it does just seem so, truth is stranger than fiction sometimes. And this is one of those cases. But yeah, how about you, Emma? What's your story with benzos?
So, well, mine was pandemic. I had tinnitus in the last lockdown. I had actually been having a really fun pandemic with making funny videos and just being silly. Obviously, as an actor, all the work was gone. So I was just kind of having fun basically in my house, my housemates, and I ended up getting tinnitus. Went to a private doctor, my dad's private doctor at the time, because in COVID, there was just no doctor to be able to see. So I went in and I said, look, I've got this tinnitus, I'm struggling to sleep. He said, okay, well, you really need to sleep. That's the most important thing. So we'll give you this drug. I really wish he'd given me Valium, because I would have been like, oh, I know what that is, but I'd never heard of Lorazepam. That's not something that I knew about. And he said that he gave it to old women. He had a lot of older patients, and he would give it to them all the time, and it was really safe. And it was just really important that I slept. So he prescribed this to me for a full sort of 6 months. And with me, I was one of those people that became quite unwell quite quickly on the drug, because that's also another thing with benzos, is we all have a different tolerance. Someone could start getting unwell after 5 years, 10 years, 2 weeks, 6 months. There's no kind of like, we're all different. So I was one of those people who became quite suicidal and quite erratic on it, started getting akathisia. And for those who don't know what that is, it's like your thoughts are going a million miles an hour, and you just got this horrible restlessness, pacing. You basically look like you're completely losing your mind. And it was a really bad time, because obviously it was a pandemic. And so I went to stay with my dad in Spain, because I just couldn't be with my housemates in this sort of state. And he just thought I was losing my mind. So pretty early on, I had sort of zero belief from my dad, which I think escalated things quite quickly. So basically, I had a feeling it was the drug. So I said to the doctor, look, I'm not feeling myself. I need to stop it. And he said, you can just stop it. There's no harm in just stopping it. Or you could taper it for 2 weeks if that makes you feel better. So I think I actually did a little taper for 2 weeks, which obviously wasn't going to do anything anyway. And it was probably within about 5 days of stopping the benzo that I got hit with this wall of absolute terror, just the feeling of horror and terror. The akathisia got worse, the pacing, and I didn't really sleep from that point onwards. It stopped me sleeping in the 6 months as well. So I hadn't been sleeping for quite a while already. And as everyone knows, if you don't sleep, you just kind of go mad. So that propelled me into, gosh, I think best part of a year of withdrawal. And I was pulled through 3 mental health hospitals. I was sectioned twice because I was thought to be completely psychotic and completely insane. And then I was one of those people that gets polydrugged. So, you go into these places and they say, oh, well, she's obviously got schizophrenia or bipolar or something. And I was given antipsychotics, antidepressants, even more benzodiazepines. I was pumped full of stuff. And the pain and suffering that I experienced, I cannot even describe. I mean, I was really beyond so I thought, beyond return. The things that were going on in my body, I mean, I couldn't have counted the symptoms. I think I had over 1,000. I mean, I couldn't even explain the sensations that were going on, but I would explain it as sort of hell. And I did actually go into a psychosis where I thought I was dead for quite a few months. I just couldn't understand. And I was just in my mum's house pacing 24/7, not sleeping. And there was one point where I basically ended up sort of about 5 stone, and I had to be rushed into hospital because I was sort of near death, and I had to be rehydrated. No one knew what was wrong with me. They just thought I was some sort of psychotic, anorexic girl. I was called a drug addict. At no point did anyone look at my medical history and think, oh, she's been on this drug for 6 months and just stopped it. At no point was that looked at, and which is quite shocking. And I actually knew, so I really did know. And I kept on saying to every single sort of psychiatrist and mental health nurse, it's this drug. And I was just met with, she's a complete idiot, and maybe she went to a festival and took too many drugs, sort of thing. So yeah, it was awful and incredibly terrifying. And that went on for the best part of a year. The way that I came back round was one morning I just took half of a Lorazepam. At this point, every day I was thinking about ways of ending my life. I just couldn't stop thinking about suicide, and reading all the forums and how injured I was like, there's no way back for me. So I took half just to see what it might do, thinking, well, maybe if I just take the whole bottle, maybe that will put me to sleep. And I took half, and within half an hour, I was back to how I'm talking to you guys now. Almost like it felt like a miracle after such destruction. And at this point, all my family and my friends had blocked me. I was completely deserted by everyone I knew. And I came back downstairs and I said, Mum, I think I'm okay. And then since then, I've been water tapering the benzo, which is obviously a very slow, gradual way of tapering. And I'm still tapering it now. I'm on 0.125, which a lot of doctors would say, that's insane. You could just stop taking it. But a lot of people who are really that harmed, that they have to go down to the 0.000, to the last bit. And I'm on Katiapine, which is an antipsychotic, and mirtazapine. So I'm an antidepressant. So I've got a lot of tapering ahead of me and a lot of rebuilding of life.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, obviously it's even though 2 of us have been through our own stories, it's still harrowing to hear and to imagine really the depths of hell that you've gone through, that each of us have gone through in our own ways. But yeah, it's just a very, very extreme level of suffering, isn't it? Both with the actual sort of biochemical changes that are going on because of the drug, but then the peripheral effects of that in terms of not having the support, which is kind of best case scenario. Worst case scenario is then actually people continuing to harm you or put you in danger's way by sectioning you and then being forced on other drugs. And it's just kind of this cycle of injustice and harm. And it's honestly a real pleasure to be sitting with you guys here today talking about this, because the strength that it takes to survive that and come out the other side and not be completely insane based off the trauma that you've gone through is an Olympic level achievement of resilience.
100%. And I actually just had that feeling too, because we're all here and we're so passionate about this because we've been through it and we've somehow come out the other end. And it sort of feels like, I think we all share that, like this really needs to change. And to be the activist, and it's just so clear to see that this has been going on for years.
Isn't that crazy? Like, I think it was one thing when I found out that all this suffering was because of a prescription med, but then the next layer of sort of, you got to be kidding me, was realizing that this has been known about since what, the 70s. The dangers have been known.
It was developed in the 50s, and they, at least by 1961, they knew.
Wow. Yeah. And all those documentaries, Naftal, because you're so good at finding things like the Ada versus Ativan, the benzodiazepine medical disaster. There are things that have been aired talking about this, and it's so severe. I mean, you watch those documentaries and it's heartbreaking. If I had heard that even before taking this benzo, I would have thought, wow, that's pretty serious. But for some reason, it's just sort of brushed under the carpet.
Yeah, I'm shocked by that too. Yeah.
Sorry, Naftal.
Yeah, I'm really shocked by that. I think once I kind of, well, I wouldn't say stable. Like, these labels are hard in withdrawal. Like, are we stable? Are you functional? Let's just say I was functional. I really wanted to know what was going on with me, and then I found the Action Manual, obviously, which explained everything that was happening to me. And then I just became like, my inner journalist was born. I was like, I want to know everything about this drug. And then the things that you find, I was so shocked that there's just so much information available on the internet, and my doctors and psychiatrists did not know anything about this. I was like, how is this even possible? And I was like, the injustice, and just having the time, because I was too ill to do anything else. So I kind of like clutched my way into like, I need to know everything about these benzodiazepines. And then you come across all these stories, so many people harmed, so many documentaries made already. There have been waves of people trying to warn, the world, like Professor Heather Ashton, for example. I'm like, why is it not being picked up? Why don't my doctors know about this? So I'm just still very interested to learn more about benzos. But I think you're correct, Emma S., that, this should be more in the media, more in the news. There needs to be so much more attention to this. This is like the most prescribed drug on the earth. So
100%. I think there needs to be like a Netflix documentary, but I know that was the ones that said, take your pills, Xanax. But it didn't really go into the absolute destruction of people's lives, like the rawness and the inhumane. It's like inhumane. I would go into my doctor's surgery and I'd be shaking, and I was so unwell, and it is brain damage. It's brain damage. So it's like, wow, this, and they kept on trying to give me gabapentin, all these drugs to try and help me. She's clearly just got something. Yeah, it's shocking.
They gave me all the drugs that you are currently on. They gave me the mirtazapine, the Katiapine, and the Katiapine is no joke. I guess I'm blessed that I wasn't on it for very long, but I'm just also very shocked and baffled by how they are fighting, when you're in benzo withdrawal, and they just try to drug you up with more stuff in the hopes it will give you some relief. But what it really does, it makes things worse.
100%. Neither of them gave me any relief. It wasn't until I reinstated the benzo, which obviously somehow at that point stopped my withdrawal. But the other two weren't doing anything. Okay, cool. So yeah, I mean, for me, it was really interesting to see how my family reacted to, everything, all this going on. Naftal, would you like to share anything about how the people around reacted?
Sure. So I think the people close to me, obviously I was very into that. I want to quit the benzos, and I sought help. So for me, it was clear that everything that was happening was related to the benzodiazepine withdrawal. My partner has been my rock. We've been through a lot. We even divorced. I would argue a lot of that was because of benzodiazepines. I was like, it's not entirely myself, and I was tired a lot. I wouldn't say it was the sole reason, but in hindsight, it definitely affected my behavior and everything. But we always, we kept loving each other. We were still best of friends when we divorced, and then we started dating again before I went in benzo withdrawal. He's been my support. He fed me, he just took care of everything. He's like the love of my life, my soulmate. He was totally on board with everything. and my mom and my sister were understanding. Some of my friends kind of bailed, but you know, in all fairness, if I would have not been exposed to this, there is no way of trying to convey what this is. This is an indescribable thing that is just, you cannot compare it to anything. So I think for some people it was like, we don't understand. Are you like a drug addict, or are you depressed? They didn't understand, and I've come to terms with that. I think what was more shocking for me was that my psychiatrist and every medical person that I saw during this withdrawal, and I was saying, this is inhumane. I almost died. What's happening? I'm so sick. I can't walk. I have akathisia, blah, blah, blah. And they just brushed it off. Like, you're just exaggerating. This should not be happening. You know, just push through. And you're taking an awful long time to come off these drugs. And this was before I found the Ashton Manual. I was just, you know, gaslighted. And that was the most shocking thing to me in terms of environment, the people that I was dealing with while I was basically having a life of death.
Yeah. Yeah. I really, really relate with that. Definitely.
Same.
And Emma?
Yeah, well, very similar. It's hard to know where to start, really. And I've never talked about this side of it before, so it's kind of a new territory. I think so. At the time, I was in a relationship, and I think similar to Naftal, like I think probably that was a reason for it breaking down, because I became very apathetic about everything. Hello. And yeah, you look back on it now and you sort of see that personality change in you, but at the time it's that frog in boiling water analogy, where you just don't realize that the heat is being turned up very drastically. And I mean, I was living in France at the time, so I didn't really have childhood friends or family around me. I was making new friends, and but I wasn't really sharing that I was on these drugs, nor did I think it was a significant thing in my life to share. I wasn't aware of, oh, I'm on something that might kill me and, you know, take away 5 years or 10 years of my life. So it was a very kind of insular thing that I was dealing with. And then when I came back to the UK, you know, I was telling my family something's really wrong, and especially when everything hit the fan, so to speak, and I couldn't function, and I was having ambulances once a week. I was really trying to convey, this is something very serious is happening. And it was very much, it was met with, well, what have the doctors said? And I said, well, they're not really saying anything. And like I said to Naftal on our podcast on Saturday, at first they thought it was vitamin D deficiency. And I was like, this is really extreme. This is a very intense thing to go through. And so I think my family and my colleagues and my employers at the time just thought it was that, and that I was very overdramatic and oversensitive, which we all know intuitively what this is like, and we knew it at the time. And in all honesty, that didn't really change, especially for the first 2 years, because there was no validation from the doctors. There was no one of professional standing saying, hey, yeah, this person has essentially been poisoned by this drug, almost died, and is now going through a kind of hell that is indescribable, because that wasn't coming from anyone but myself. Unfortunately, you know, my family, for the large part, struggled to fully understand what was going on. And it was kind of, the attitude was sort of, I overheard conversations about me, unfortunately, sort of saying, oh, maybe she just doesn't want to work. And it was very hurtful, because I just thought, this is, my own family don't know me. This isn't who I am. I would not be choosing this. I fought really hard to go and build an independent life for myself in France. Why would I suddenly trip myself up like this? Doesn't make any sense. And my parents were going through a divorce at the time, and I heard things like, she's attention seeking, and it just kind of, yeah, it took a lot of digesting. And at the same time, I recognize that they're human, and I don't know how things came across from their perspective. Everyone's got their own problems and issues to deal with. So I do kind of want to balance that out and show some empathy for them as well. But yeah, it was very tough. And likewise to Naftal, you know, the professionals just weren't, the doctors just weren't helpful in any way. I remember turning up at doctors' offices and trying different tactics each time. Like, sometimes I go in there and be very stoic and really put on a brave face, and they'd be like, well, clearly you're not that ill, so we're not going to do anything. Or I'd go in other times and be very vulnerable and emotional and say, I really feel like if something doesn't change, I'm going to die. And I remember one doctor just looking at me and basically sliding a leaflet for counselling across the table, and that was the end of the appointment. And I was just like, what do I do at this point? Had some great friends that stood by me, but I had to move around a lot. So I've moved about 8 or 9 times during this period through necessity. So I haven't really had much in-person support and spent a lot of the time isolated up till the past sort of year and a half. Met my current partner, and same as Naftal, like, she's been my absolute rock. And we've gone through a lot together too, but just stood by me and just always believed in me, and kind of always been able to see the real me that's, you know, not the one that's been suffering with this. So yeah, very similar stories, I think. How about you?
Very similar. Yeah, I really relate. Like, there's so many similarities. But I definitely have had exactly the same as you, Emma, in terms of, I mean, I had not one person. I mean, I just didn't have anyone. So you didn't even have a partner who was like, oh yeah, you know, I'm going to save you and help you. I was very much deserted from like the liftoff. And I also have this thing now, because the way that my family were, it was very disturbing for me to see. Like, I always think, you know, I don't know whether other people think this, like, what would everyone be like if the world was to end? You know, would that person just throw me under a bus, or would they actually help me? And I think this is one of those situations where you're in a crisis, and it's only in a crisis you really get to see other people's reaction. And it was really shocking for me to see my family, you know, but then, you know, we are quite dysfunctional, and I am very, you know, I don't want to kind of like slam them. And obviously I've done a lot of interviews and things, and I don't want to kind of bitch about my family. But yeah, it was shocking. But what really didn't help was obviously the doctors saying the whole time, Emma's clearly having a mental breakdown and it's her. There's just absolutely no way that it can be the drug. So I also empathize with my parents as well, and my my friends, in a sense, because they genuinely thought that I was insane, because we all trust the doctor. So what can we do? I mean, I did really kind of show them all the research I found, and there is so much online as well. And I mean, my dad would say, oh, stop looking at those forums, they're full of crazy people, you know, like it's just feeding the problem and all of this. And he really got it into his head that I was making it all up, which really was hurtful. Like you said, Emma, you know, I just thought, wow, he doesn't know me at all. And up until this point, we'd sort of been best friends because my parents divorced and I was always closer to my dad. And I was just always his kind of like crutch, and I guess he was mine, I thought, anyway. And so it was shocking for me to see that. And our relationship has completely changed now, you know. It's, yes, we're talking, but I don't feel quite the same, you know. If someone just leaves you for dead, I mean, he pretty much sectioned me. He saw the security guards throw me into a wheelchair and strap me down and be quite rough with me, and he refused to come and collect me. So the only way I got out of there was a lady that I knew in Spain, a friend of mine. I managed to message her and say, please, can you come and get me? And the nurses were calling my dad saying, you know, you need to come and get your daughter. And he just wasn't answering the phone. So, I mean, really, that's just on another level of like, wow, you know, because I wouldn't say that I was like being, what's the word? I wasn't trying to hurt anyone else. I was just in a lot of suffering myself. So I was quite shocked to see how that is kind of treated. Like you were saying, you know, someone just passes you a thing over the counter. Let's just say that I was actually suicidal because I was, you know, depressed. It's sort of met with this like, God, there's, you know, something wrong with you. It's not met with kindness a lot of the time in the medical world. I was really treated with like I was some sort of villain, or, you know, that I'd robbed someone or done something wrong. At no point was I treated with kindness. So that was just a real eye-opener, the whole thing. And yeah, gosh, and my friends.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah.
So one of the things, and I mentioned that in my podcast, in my story, as you will, the first time that I wanted to come off, I had a psychiatrist saying, really declaring me an addict, like a drug seeker. I was like, no, I want to come off. And she was very mean. She was like, you're so addicted. And then she tried to, taper me with the diazepam, and she gave me like 7 tablets of 2 milligrams. I'm like, why? Because it's impractical. Because you need to realize how addicted you are. Like, very patronizing, just, so out of place. In terms of how I think I expected doctors to be kind. Why else would you become a doctor? But my
Right.
my view has totally changed. Some people are just mean.
Yeah, I
Yeah, and
completely. Yeah, go on, Emma.
so I was just going to say, also, that just sounds really like, if you're going there because you're saying, hey, I need help, and I'm coming to you, the person that we're told to come to, and I'd like to taper off. I don't know how she's equated that to, you're such an addict and you're irresponsible, making all these insinuations. And I think that is one of the most infuriating things about this is we are just ordinary people that have had fairly, ordinary issues, whether it's tinnitus, I'm saying the American way, tinnitus, or insomnia or anxiety. At no point were we chasing drugs. These are prescription medicines that we took as prescribed. And I think the whole insinuation around addiction, and I remember somebody, a paramedic said to me once, all we can offer you is to, the address for a local rehab. And I was just like, excuse me? And this was 3 years after coming off the drug. And it just completely blew my mind that somehow that was the answer. Like, no, these are meds that I've taken because of doctors. There's got to be a different answer to this. So yeah, it's just mind-blowing, isn't it?
Absolutely mind-blowing. The whole thing. I mean, I was taken to, what's it called, Narcotics Anonymous, by a friend. They were like, I didn't realize at the time I was so sort of vulnerable and in this state of terror all the whole time. And I was staying in her flat. And oh my God, she was like, I think you need to go to Narcotics Anonymous. I think, you might have a drug problem, Emma. I was just like, I do not have a drug problem. What the hell? And I even went and gave it a go. I was so confused because also, when it's happening to you, you're like, have I got something deeply wrong with me? Because it's so severe, isn't it? What happens? Like, you're the amount of anxiety and fear. I mean, it was just on another level. The terror and the horrible thoughts, and oh my God, it's just crazy how much it can alter you. Alter your state.
I've actually, and I've thought this a long time internally and started speaking about it after I and we haven't yet done the interview, but I am connected with a guy who was kidnapped by the Taliban in Afghanistan. And he actually said to me when we had our sort of preliminary chat about it, I think we've actually been through similar things. And I think we should have the podcast episode as more of a kind of two-way discussion rather than you just interviewing me. And we can talk about the lessons we've learned. And it was honestly one of the kindest things anyone's ever said to me, because that, when I have tried to think about how to describe it to people, that's the closest that I've come up with, is it feels like you are taken into a room and forcibly injected with drugs that are literally injuring your central nervous system and your brain. And you're screaming for help and nobody's coming to help you. Meanwhile, the world carries on outside, your family carry on with their lives outside, and you're stuck in this room knowing that tomorrow it's happening again. But the more it happens, the more it compounds to the fact where you can't properly process it. One, because of the drugs, the prescription drugs, and two, because of the trauma that is then compounding every single day that you're going through that, to the point where you then can't see it clearly. And you don't have anyone around you holding up a mirror or holding up any sign of validation that this is what you're going through. And you just lose kind of your sense of everything.
Reality. For me, I
100%.
think for me, when I try to explain, it's like you're into this parallel universe of suffering. It's like you're somewhere no one else is. It's like you're just so disconnected from your own body and the world, and like otherworldly.
And it's like you can't be like around other people, but you also don't want to be on your own. And it's like, what do you do? And then no one's got a cure for it, and all the doctors, it's really awful. And a lot of people have taken their lives on this. I mean, so many people have taken their lives and never got the justice, was never listened to, and probably died with everyone thinking that they were crazy.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that I started my podcast, because I am convinced that maybe it was like a 30-minute window. If I didn't take the benzo, I would have jumped out the window. So being so close to death, I'm like, I want to speak for the people that actually did jump.
Exactly. And who are stuck in their rooms. Like you say, Emma, I mean, you really explain it so well. You just know that the next day and the next day and the next day, and you never know when it's going to stop.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the worst parts of it is life throws up all kinds of adversity to everyone at some point in their life. But usually you have some kind of validation somewhere from it. And secondly, you usually have access to a support system that then gives you some indication of what you're dealing with. You have a scope of it. And it's another layer of kind of psychological torture when it's just open-ended and you don't understand it. You don't know what's happened to you. I mean, I had doctors say to me before I got the validation in 2019, they said, look, you're probably never going to know what's happened to you. And this is probably your life from now on. And it's another kind of thing of you guys generally gave me the drug that's now poisoned and injured me and almost killed me. But now you're giving me words and contextualizing a situation that could quite literally make me go and throw myself in front of a bus because you've just told me that there's no hope and that I'm never going to understand this. That, anybody going through that level of suffering, them being told that, and that would have been in their hands, that at their kind of, their responsibility. And thankfully I didn't.
I know, yeah, 100%. I mean, what a hopeless situation to be in. Just completely like in so much suffering and nobody can help you. And I mean, I soon kind of realized, obviously, this huge gap in the medical, I was like, wow, I am in the shit because doesn't seem to be an answer. And I would regularly walk outside and see if I could kind of gather the strength to jump in front of a bus, but I just couldn't. And also that's the thing, I didn't actually want to die. So I was talking about suicide and I was talking about it a lot, but it was because I was just suffering so much and I had all these thoughts just flooding my head. But the root of me, each time I went to go, I was like, it still held me there. Like, no, I don't want to do it. This is an awful place to be in. I wondered if we could talk a little bit about like maybe what a benzodiazepine does, like in a brief, because obviously the science of it. Obviously, we're not doctors, but actually I feel like we kind of know more than the doctors because we've been through it. So, and I mean, doctors have absolutely no idea what these drugs do.
Yeah, and actually, I remember a doctor saying to me, the first one that validated it, and she said, "We've poisoned you, but now there's nothing we can do about it." She was about to retire, so I think she had the freedom of being able to express herself honestly. But she said to me, would you be able to come back in and share everything you know with me, because we don't know anything. You know more about it than we do. So yeah, from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
Wow.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I mean, where to start with that? I suppose we all talk about the Gaba receptors, and that's what they affect, the Gaba, which is an incredibly important part of your whole body. I'd like to argue that maybe the Gaba receptors kind of, they lead us to everything. Our sight, our hearing, our
and they're a natural brakes. They're like a natural brakes.
Yeah. And I mean, you said it, Emma, earlier, they tap into your nervous system and they've damaged your nervous system. And there is some sort of brain damage there as well that creates this absolute torturous. And I suppose because the benzo initially calms you, but when it stops working or you go into withdrawal, it then does the opposite of that. And you kind of go in reverse. So from being slow and calm, you're all of a sudden like that, aren't you? You're really fast. And these GABA receptors, I mean, obviously I'm not a scientist, but I have read a lot about it, that it takes a long time for them to be able to heal, a really long time. And yeah, and also I can never pronounce this, but the
amygdala.
Amygdala.
Yeah.
Which
fancy words.
So fancy, and that's a really important. They always talk about that in meditation and sound therapy, how it really calms the amygdala. And what benzos do is they actually cause it to enlarge, and get bigger. So then you start feeling these unnatural, like almost off the scale feelings of terror, because that sort of calm, which is meant for calm, has actually been reversed, and you're now having this like it's just otherworldly. What can happen, and it's a very unnatural process. We're not supposed to be taking a benzo every day for that reason, because it's so dangerous what can happen to those GABA receptors and the amygdala. They're so important to our like peace. It's basically our little peace center has been completely sort of maybe set on fire.
Well, not only that, I think Emma H describes it really well, is that, I mean, she knew from the moment that she took the benzo that she felt drugged up and tired. And, I had the same, but I didn't relate it to the benzos. I was like, I was already tired and not sleeping from my tinnitus. So I thought, it's the tinnitus. But, with the gift of hindsight, they do really drug you up and make you feel tired, and you never really sleep well on them. So that is one of the things that these benzos do as well. They make you tired.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, so when you first take them, you're saying, yeah, they do make you feel very drowsy and like.
Yeah, and I think I had a paradoxical reaction first, because I think my GP gave me like 2 or 3 different kinds of benzos to try. And first one did nothing. The second one made me wet my bed. I was 33 years old, and it kind of like paralyzed my muscles. And I didn't know that there was a distinction between these benzos. I just thought I'm getting drug A, B, C. And then the third one was an Ativan-like drug. And I slept for 2 hours and then took another one, which now I know I wasn't supposed to do that. But those first few months I was just tight, but also depressed. I'm not a depressed person by nature, but I was like, oh, this tinnitus and the sleep and the pills, it's really, but it was the pills. And then when I got switched to a long-acting benzodiazepine, I thought, oh, this is a miracle drug. No, it just stabilized me. And now that I still have a long way to go in terms of recovery and getting off the drug. But I would argue that some of my good days now, I'm like, I was tired all the time on these benzos, and I was kind of depressed some days, and edgy or agitated. And now I see that's all related to the benzos, because if I think back of the version that I was before benzos, I was a different person. Happy, healthy, all of those things. Yeah.
And that's it. They're not meant for long term. I'd like to argue that maybe they should just all be taken off the shelf and only used if someone's having a seizure in hospital.
I would. That's my stance on it as well.
Yeah.
Me too. Reserve them for people that hospital use only. And if you do have a crisis, your GP can refer you to a psychiatrist or whatnot. But I would argue that it's not in the right hands with GPs or psychiatrists. And stronger warning labels, and just no long-term use. Period.
100%.
I will just say quickly, and for anyone listening to this who's on a benzo or knows someone on a benzo and is panicking hearing all of this, which is totally understandable, but unfortunately it's the truth, and knowledge is power. Don't just sort of do what I did and come off them straight away, even though that seems like a sensible option. You do want to make sure that you go and look at the right way to taper off. That is the safest way. These can cause death by cold turkeying. You can have seizures. So it is really important to go and do your research before just sort of panicking and throwing everything away from the cupboards, and finding the best way to do that. And I think Natalia, you mentioned it earlier, there's the Ashton manual that's online, and there are like Emma, you were saying about going to forums and support groups, and there are a lot out there. And yes, there are some really difficult things to read and kind of worst case scenarios. But at the same time, that knowledge that's out there is life-saving, and you just have to have the sort of objectivity to pull the sensible bits of data and kind of do your due diligence. And if you're listening to this and you're someone that knows someone that's on a benzo, that support for them by being a functioning cognitive brain that can go and help and do the research, that is potentially life-saving and can really help turn somebody's life around. So although everything we're saying is obviously quite extreme and drastic, A, that's the reality of it, but B, it still requires caution and care when coming off these drugs.
100%. Like I always like my kind of advice to like family and friends who are like, wow, this is a thing, is to be that advocate for your family or your friend and to be that person, right? How are we going to work this out? Let's go and look on these forums. Let's look at what diet you need to follow, what things can give you a setback. For example, Emma, we had a very similar thing where, I think you drank a beer and it gave you a
Live,
really
but yeah.
it really gave you a very bad setback. And because the beer, it goes back to the GABA receptors, they all work on the same receptor. And there's lots of vitamins that, and I've heard magnesium, we're all different, obviously. But when you are harmed, some people are very, very sensitive to different kinds of food. But all that information are on these benzo forums. And, it's all from people going through it. I definitely had a setback from alcohol, and I probably won't ever drink again because it was just so terrifying what happened to me. That was also kind of a reason I got sectioned maybe for the first time. It's hard to keep track. Yes, and also I was told by my doctor, the private doctor, that it was fine to drink. It's absolutely fine. So I did actually ask. I said, "Oh, is it okay to drink?" And he said yes. But actually, it's one of the worst things that you could do.
I mean, and that right there in itself is medical negligence. It's no different than somebody taking a drug and saying, "Hey, can I take an antihistamine with this as well?" And a doctor saying yes, and then you take that drug and you almost die from it. It's no different from that. And like Naftal was saying earlier, what's so frustrating is all this information is out there, but it's not our responsibility to go and double check what the doctors have said. Even though I think in this day and age, that's sensible to do, but they should know this. They should be aware of the dangers of taking other medications whilst on it, or drinking alcohol. So yeah,
exactly.
And a lot of people can just, a lot of people are open to getting like more information. I remember when I was prescribed my benzos that I looked at the answer pamphlet, and yeah, it like says like 1 in 10,000 people have this or that symptom. But all the symptoms that I've had and everything that you find online is not in the answer pamphlets. They are not specific on long term what will happen, how the withdrawal should be, what can that you could die. I would have liked to know that this drug could lead to potentially me dying, because I would have treated the whole benzo thing differently. If someone wise, it didn't happen unfortunately, but if someone during my long-term benzodiazepine use has just sent me the ASHA manual, I would have read it, and just by reading that alone, I'm like, wait, this stuff is bad. And it would have been a nicer kind of to like go with what Emma H is saying. Like if I was on benzos, not sick yet, from that place tapering, from like being sensible, it makes it would have been easier than to taper in a cold turkey and dying situation. You know what I mean?
100%. I think just having the right information, and also just to be honest, just this never happening to anyone ever again would be great. But yeah, it is still happening, and it is incredibly common, which is also scary to see, isn't it? In all the forums and everything, all the people and how we found each other, which is quite incredible. I guess we should probably end this just sort of discussing what we're all doing to kind of try and, bring light to this. Would you like to start, Naftal?
Sure. I have my podcast, Benzo Tired. Originally, it was Dutch, but then I changed it to English, and it is my coping mechanism, as well as trying to inform, educate the world. I have a lot of dreams in terms of educating people about the harms and dangers and risks in terms of benzodiazepines. It's something to live for or look forward to once I'm totally off the drug. I really want to spend a lot of my life trying to stop this from happening by educating people, especially the people that have not been harmed yet. So really warn people so it doesn't happen again. So Benzo Tired is kind of my outlet and my way to get in touch with people and just discuss topics for people that, may be interested or need some help.
Yeah, and it's great. You're really good at finding people, lots of interesting people. So for anyone, do log on to Benzo Tired. It's very interesting. And how about you, Emma?
Yeah, so I also have a podcast, which is called #PressPlay, and the premise of that was literally feeling like my life had been put on pause and wanting to kind of find stories. So some of the episodes are are benzo related, and some are sort of about starting a business or running a business, being a CEO, or overcoming different kinds of adversity. So yeah, there's that, which is running alongside a documentary film that I'm trying to get off the ground, which is called Playing with Life, the soundtrack. And it's sort of documenting my journey through this, but also panning out to the much bigger picture of what's going on. And I realized along the way with my journey that I wanted to watch a film about somebody that's recovered and that has got through this and has been an extreme case of it. And I thought, what if I can be that story? And what if it gives me something to kind of get my teeth into and focus on and do something positive that I can be creative with, but also feel like I'm doing something to help others along the way. And so it sort of ticks off all those boxes for me. And yeah, so right now I'm working on that, trying to get the funding in so I can start hiring a team and get it into full production. I'm sort of filming scenes here and there as I go. And it's kind of funny because I've had people say to me, why don't you just kind of walk away from this? And now that you're slowly but surely healing, why don't you just go and have your life again? It's like, because my life isn't the same. You can't go through something like this for 5-10 years and just forget about it. And all respect to people that do take that path and go, you know what, I want to draw a line under this. I'm going to go back to my job and just kind of forget this happens. Each to their own, and everyone has to do what's right for them. But I actually feel like the film for me is my way of processing this and feeling like I can draw a line under it and see what the next chapter of life brings. So yeah, that's the podcast and the film is kind of the focus for now.
Yeah.
How about you, MS?
Me. So, well, what I love as well, Emma, is that we met, and then when we got talking, like it was just so similar, all the things that we were trying to do. And also we're both musical, and, you know, through your music as well, you've been kind of thinking of ways of how to kind of reach people in a more creative way. And that's what I'm definitely doing. So with the podcast that I am making, that came about because, not the podcast, well, I have a podcast and a documentary. But the documentary came about by a couple of my friends just watching my story. I was very, very open. I mean, people would have watched my Instagram through this going, oh my God, Emma has lost it. And, you know, but there was two of my friends who, you know, they really do know me. And when I sort of stabilized, I put a little story up and said, oh my God, I think I'm sort of back to life. And they contacted me, and they're part of a production company. They're a couple. And they were like, we've really got to make a story out of this. And they did all their research and they saw this huge gap, and they're both very passionate about it as well. So that kind of really felt like a universe sort of thing, you know, like a very kind of joining of something that was meant to happen. And so we are doing that. We've interviewed Mark Horowitz, which is he's a very well-known psychiatrist who has his own story with an antidepressant. He's currently stuck on 2, I think, tapering them. And then also Adele Framer from Surviving Antidepressants. She's American, and it's amazing what she's done. We've interviewed her as well. She's been helping people for 10 years come off of psychiatric medication just selflessly. Through her own experience of being kind of, well, she said 10 years. She was sort of disabled for about 10 years of her life. And like you said, Emma, you can't go through that, you know, 5-10 years, however many years, to be honest. Mine was sort of a couple of years and just sort of forget about it. Because it's like, yeah, anyway, it needs to be spoken about. So that's what I'm doing. And Jess, who is the director, she's had a baby, so things are kind of slowed down a little bit, but I am pushing her. And I'm hoping that, you know, I can kind of interweave like all 3 of us into the documentary as well, just to show how many people are affected by this. And I would just so love it to go on Netflix. Come on. It's got to get on there.
Or the universe,
come on.
Fingers crossed,
both of our documentaries, you know, will just have this kind of wave of documentaries coming out, you know, hit the people's minds, and let everyone know about this. And obviously I'm carrying on doing documentaries and anything. I've also got a website called beatingthebenzo.com where I just keep on putting like any information or anything that I'm finding out on there. So yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, it's really exciting, and I it's kind of strange, but again, maybe a moment where you think, oh, maybe this is meant to happen, that we are producing these films and trying to do the same thing. And it's such a turnaround from having felt, before I knew what was going on, just feeling like, am I the only one in the world that's feeling this?
Sorry. One second. Sorry.
Actually, getting a dog is what I want the end of the film to be. Obviously, there's a lot of other stuff that I want to achieve. That's all right. But like, I just want this scene where I've got my puppy. I want him to be like a black German Shepherd, maybe a husky, called Tiago, and we're just going to be standing on a mountaintop, kind of looking out to the distance, and just seeing this whole new chapter beginning. And yeah, that's the dream. But yeah, I was just going to say, thank you. That it's such a turnaround from sort of feeling like, am I the only one going through this? Am I crazy? And then realizing what's happened, and then realizing the scale of this, and then connecting with others. And it's just so interesting that we've all connected, and that we've got the documentaries going on simultaneously. And I think that's going to be really interesting to see how it all pans out, and sort of being able to reflect back on this time where we were grassroots and independent, and just trying to kind of not only build these things, but still navigate our own recovery with this as well. I mean, it's
very surreal. And Naftal, you're just like the magician of connection. He just like connects people together and finds them. That's your thing, I think.
Thanks. I am just, I was obviously it's awful to hear everyone's story. But I'm just very impressed by the both of you really trying to make a difference. So I feel like I guess I'm connecting with people, but how do I say this? Like, I'm connecting with good people, like people I would have been friends with you even if this didn't happen. So I don't know. It's the universe works in mysterious ways.
It really does, and it's great.
if we have time, Emma, I know you've got to go for an audition, but briefly, just how has this experience, how has it changed your sort of existential views? Have you gone to quite a spiritual place through this journey?
Yes. Well, not only did I go through the pits of hell, which, that's a spiritual thing on its own. Yes, I've become more empathetic to people that I now know that there's so many people being harmed this way. I'm just very more empathetic to people harmed by any form of drugs, not only prescription drugs, but street drugs or whatever. And that the world is, it's different than I thought it was. It is. And it's made me kinder. I'm more, maybe this is because I had a near-death experience that alone will change you, I think. I'm just happy for every day that I slept and that I'm feeling well, that life, I will never take life for granted again.
100%. I have got that perspective of nothing matters, like.
And I think I learned when you're so sick and you're just, craving for, how do I say this, salvation, then when you're at your lowest, you really realize what really matters in life, and what isn't important and what is not. And I don't want to, the rest of my life, I don't want to spend on BS. I want to do something that matters.
100%. That's it. Well, this has been an absolute joy.
Thank you so much
Likewise.
for having us.
Okay, well, I'm sure we'll speak soon, because we always speak. And lots of love.
Lots of love.